In a quiet corner of the wizarding world, nestled between whispered histories and forgotten spells, there lived a wand no longer waiting to choose. It had once sparked with magic, flaring with purpose when first grasped by the wizard it accepted, but something, no one knew quite what, had caused it to fall silent. And so it rested, tucked away on a high shelf in a quiet room behind a crooked wooden door where dust fell gently like slow rain and time itself seemed to pause. Tonight, my dear sleep fellows, we're going to take a slow walk through this soft mystery, a tale that isn't filled with battles or boldness, but with hushes and hums. A tale about a wand that once chose and then never did again. Before we begin, if you find comfort in these magical night stories, you're welcome to follow along, subscribe for more calm tales, or explore the other soft journeys waiting quietly in our enchanted library. But for now, just relax. Let your thoughts drift. There's no need to remember everything. The magic will take care of that. Let us begin at the very edge of twilight, where the lights of Hogsmeade are just starting to glow. Lanterns swing gently in the breeze outside the three broomsticks. The warmth from inside spills across the cobblestones like melted butter, and the clinking of teacups and low chatter drifts outward into the calm evening air. Behind the owl post, beyond a curling iron gate half covered in ivy, there's a forgotten path leading to a place most witches and wizards no longer visit. Ollivanders, makers of fine wands since 382 BC. Of course, the main shop still stands proudly on Diagon Alley, and Garrick Ollivander's name still floats with quiet reverence through every corridor of Hogwarts. But this is his grandfather's old annex. Built long ago, it had been used to store wands that had seen something strange, wands that had stopped working or changed their minds or simply never found a match. Wand lore, as you may know, is a curious thing. Wands are not simply tools. They feel, they remember, and sometimes they wait. A soft wind rustles the thin curtains of a crooked window. The glow of moonlight catches on the curled metal latch of the door. Inside, the room is filled with shelves upon shelves and boxes upon boxes. Each is labeled in careful handwriting. Dust rests gently atop them all, except one. High on the third shelf, a slender box sits askew, as if it had recently stirred. The wand inside, made of ash wood with a unicorn hair core, lies in stillness, yet something faint shimmers in the grain. A ripple, a whisper, a memory. Some say this wand once belonged to a Hogwarts student who disappeared under mysterious, peaceful circumstances. Others say the wand itself made the choice not to choose again. And tonight, we are about to learn why. So pull your blanket a little closer. Breathe in the soft scent of candle wax and old pages. We're about to drift into a quieter corner of the magical world, where wands remember and stories rest like folded parchment, waiting to unfold. Harry Potter had grown used to strange objects finding their way into his life. Enchanted mirrors, whispering diaries, keys that fluttered like birds. Yet lately, it wasn't danger or destiny that followed him. It was quiet curiosity, the kind that tugged gently, not urgently, asking only to be noticed. He stood near the tall window of the Gryffindor common room, watching snow drift lazily past the glass. The fire behind him crackled low, its warmth steady and familiar. Hogwarts felt especially peaceful tonight, as if the castle itself had settled into a thoughtful mood. Across the room, Hermione Granger sat curled in an armchair, a thick book balanced on her knees. She wasn't really reading. Her eyes moved across the page. Yes, but her thoughts were elsewhere. Wand lore, ancient magic, the subtle ways objects remembered their past. Hermione had always believed that magic left impressions, like fingerprints on the world. And lately, she'd felt as though one such impression was quietly calling out. Near the hearth, Ron Weasley lounged on the rug, leaning against a cushion, half asleep but listening. Ron didn't pretend to understand every magical mystery, but he understood comfort. He knew the feeling of places that felt safe and objects that carried meaning simply by being there. Hogwarts, to him, was full of those. "You ever notice," Ron murmured, eyes half closed, "how some things in this castle feel tired, like they've done their bit and just want to rest?" Hermione looked up slowly. "That's actually a fascinating observation," she said gently. "There are theories about magical exhaustion. Objects can choose to withdraw." Harry turned from the window. "Like a wand?" he asked quietly. Both of them looked at him then. Harry didn't often bring up his wand in reflective moments. It had been with him through too much. But earlier that evening, during a routine visit to Hogsmeade with Professor McGonagall, something unusual had happened. They had stopped briefly near an old storage annex belonging to Ollivanders. Harry hadn't gone inside, yet he'd felt it. A soft pull, almost like recognition, not from his own wand, but from somewhere deeper. It didn't feel broken, Harry continued, choosing his words carefully, just finished, like it had already made its choice. Hermione's expression softened. "Wands are loyal," she said, "but they're also deeply personal. Perhaps some of them decide they've said everything they needed to say." Ron shifted, propping himself up on his elbows. "Blimey, imagine being a wand that's done enough adventuring. I'd want a nice shelf and a long nap." They shared a quiet smile. Elsewhere in the castle, Professor McGonagall paused mid-step, as if sensing something subtle had aligned. And far away, in a forgotten room lined with narrow boxes and careful labels, a single wand rested in stillness, listening, remembering, waiting to choose again, but to be understood. And tonight, 3 familiar hearts were closer than ever to hearing its story. A warm hush settled over the wooden floorboards of Ollivander's wand shop. Outside, the lanterns of Diagon Alley began to flicker to life one by one, casting long golden reflections across the cobblestone streets. Inside, the last customers of the day had long since gone, and Garrick Ollivander had drawn the curtains shut with a careful flick of his fingers, the gentle swish of his robes echoing faintly in the room. Only the steady tick-tick-tick of an old magical clock near the entrance disturbed the silence, soft, deliberate, like it too knew how to respect the shop's age-old quiet. That evening, a soft bell tinkled, not from the shop's front door, but from the back room where the oldest wands rested. Garrick paused. The bell was charmed to ring only when something truly unusual occurred, something that hadn't happened in a very, very long time. He walked slowly into the back, past narrow, towering shelves of wand boxes, each coated in a fine layer of ancient dust. There was something different in the air, an almost hesitant shiver that tingled across his fingertips, like the memory of a long-forgotten spell. The wand shop was no stranger to mysteries, but this one felt like it had waited patiently through decades of silence, waiting for the right night to stir. In the deepest corner of the shop, far beyond the reach of casual browsers, rested a velvet-lined pedestal that held a single wand, boxed, untouched, and oddly serene. Garrick's eyes softened. He hadn't seen it react in over 50 years. The wand was holly and phoenix feather, 11 inches, remarkably similar to another wand that once belonged to a boy named Harry Potter. But this one had never been chosen, never responded to any hand. It had simply existed, quiet, dormant, patient. Its twin had been destined for greatness. But this wand had only watched, until now. As he approached, Garrick felt a change, not a movement in the air, but in the quiet. The stillness itself felt heavier, as if the wand were breathing for the first time in decades. The glass of its case shimmered faintly, a soft golden glow forming in its center, like morning sun through mist. Garrick reached out and unlatched the glass. The glow stopped. He tilted his head gently, not disturbed, only curious. "You've waited a long time," he whispered softly to it, as though speaking to an old friend just waking from a very deep dream. He didn't touch it, not yet. Instead, he stepped back and made a note in his journal, scribbling a single line. The wand moved. What he didn't see, what no eye in the shop could see, was the quiet pulse now humming inside the wand's core. It had not yet chosen, but it had remembered something, someone. Across the castle at Hogwarts, the corridors were hushed with the softness of bedtime hours. Moonlight pooled through stained glass windows, painting the stone walls in gentle hues of blue and lavender. Most of the students were tucked in their dormitories. But in the Gryffindor common room, Hermione Granger sat cross-legged on a velvet armchair, her nose in an old book that smelled faintly of rosemary and candle wax. Harry had gone to bed early. Ron was snoring by the fireplace. But Hermione couldn't sleep. Something about her dreams lately had tugged at her. Soft sounds, golden light, and the feeling of holding something important that kept slipping away. She turned the page, and then, very softly, her book vibrated, just once, a gentle, almost polite tremble. Her eyes widened. She blinked. It happened again. The page beneath her fingertips shifted. No wind, no charm, just movement, as if the book itself had sighed. A single name glowed faintly in golden ink across the parchment. Holly, 11 inches, phoenix feather. Her breath caught. She hadn't been thinking about wands. The book wasn't even about wand lore. It was a history of magical ethics in the early goblin rebellions. She tilted her head and whispered, Actio Wandlore, and from her bookshelf floated a thick, sleep-dusted book she hadn't touched in over a year. She opened it slowly, and to her surprise, a folded piece of parchment drifted out and landed in her lap. It wasn't hers. It was dated 51 years ago, written in Ollivander's handwriting. One wand remains, has not chosen, twin to Harry's, silent yet steady. Holly, 11 inches, phoenix feather, feels as though it waits. Hermione stared. Her heartbeat stayed calm, yet curiosity blossomed like a quiet flower inside her chest. She gently tucked the parchment into the back of the book and leaned further into the armchair. The fire cracked lightly beside her, and the moonlight grew a little stronger, as if encouraging her to wonder what would make a wand wait, and what did it mean for one to stir now. The next morning, Harry sat beside Hermione at breakfast, watching her stare down at her porridge with the distant look he recognized as her deep-thinking face. "You okay?" he asked gently. She blinked. "Yes, I just had the strangest night. I think I received a message." "A message?" She nodded, looking up. "From a wand." Harry blinked. "That's new." "It was one like yours," she said, her voice softer now, as though afraid the wrong volume might break the thread of mystery. "Same wood, same core, same length." Harry tilted his head. "But I thought mine was unique. It's why Voldemort's wand reacted the way it did." "I know," Hermione whispered, "which is why this makes no sense." They sat quietly for a moment as the hall buzzed around them. Then Hermione reached into her bag and pulled out the parchment. Harry held it gently, like it might dissolve. Ollivander wrote, "This?" Hermione nodded. Harry looked up, eyes thoughtful. "Do you think it's calling?" Hermione didn't answer for a moment. Then softly she said, "Not calling, remembering." That night, a gentle mist hung over the forbidden forest, curling along the grass like soft ribbon. The stars overhead blinked quietly. The world seemed suspended in a hush, and inside Ollivander's, the old wand glowed again. But this time, it did more. It rose, just an inch above its velvet bed, slowly, peacefully. And then it turned, pointing not toward the door, not toward the street, but toward Hogwarts, as if something or someone it remembered had returned. Ollivander, now seated at his desk with a cup of mint tea, did not rush to it. He simply watched with a kind smile, as though he had waited for this moment just as long as the wand had. He whispered, "At last." The next few days passed like softly turned pages in an ancient book. The glow of candles in the Hogwarts corridors remained gentle, and the sleepy silence in the common room at night was only ever broken by the quiet rustle of parchment or the soothing purr of Crookshanks curled up on the armchair by the fire. Harry, Hermione, and Ron had settled into a slow rhythm of quiet investigations. The mysterious wand in the room of requirement hadn't moved, nor had it shown any further sign of life. But it hadn't disappeared either. It stayed, resting in silence, as if waiting for something or someone. One evening, after a quiet supper in the great hall where golden light dripped from the floating candles and the pumpkin soup gave off a pleasant, earthy scent. Harry found himself once again drifting toward the seventh floor. He wasn't entirely sure why. His feet carried him, quietly, gently, without urgency. Behind him, Ron yawned as he caught up, a half-eaten biscuit still in hand, while Hermione followed with her scarf wrapped tightly around her neck. "I've been thinking," she murmured, her voice barely above a whisper. "What if that wand isn't waiting to be used at all?" But remembering, Harry frowned. Remembering, she nodded. Some spells, some objects, they retain fragments of the past. Memories, echoes. Maybe this wand doesn't need to be wielded again. It just needs someone to understand what it's holding. That idea stayed with them as they entered the room of requirement. Once again, the room appeared exactly as before, cozy, warmly lit, filled with old shelves and forgotten magical things. And in the center, on its velvet cushion, the wand waited. But something was different tonight. The air was cooler, not cold, more like a soft wind brushing past their cheeks, stirring cobwebs and lifting the corners of old parchment. Hermione took a cautious step forward and noticed faint silver light weaving around the wand, barely visible, like the mist of a dream remembered too late. Then the room pulsed. It was not a loud sensation, not something to startle or alarm. It was more like a breath, a long, slow exhale from the very walls of the castle. The glow around the wand deepened, and suddenly the shelves that surrounded them began to shimmer. Hermione reached out toward one of the shelves, and as her fingers neared the old books, a whisper echoed in the room, not in any known language, but in a feeling. A hush of longing, a sigh of time, a silent request for presence. Books began to slide from their shelves, opening slowly mid-air as if guided by invisible hands. Each revealed flickers of forgotten wand lore, illustrations of rare woods, enchanted cores, and ancient runes that pulsed faintly with the same silver light encircling the wand. "It's showing us something," Hermione breathed. "It's teaching us." Harry nodded slowly, mesmerized, or remembering out loud. Ron, wide-eyed, was watching a tiny notebook hover in front of him, its pages gently flipping on their own. "This is brilliant," he whispered, "like the room is alive." Just then, the wand lifted, not high, just an inch or so off the velvet cushion, hovering peacefully in the air like a feather caught in a gentle breeze. It drifted, not toward Harry, not toward Ron, but toward Hermione. The movement was unhurried, deliberate, like a story slowly unfolding its next line. Hermione held her breath. Her hand lifted instinctively, but the wand did not settle into her palm. Instead, it turned once, then drifted back toward the cushion and rested again, silent. Hermione exhaled slowly. "It doesn't want a wielder," she said quietly. "It wants understanding." As if in reply, the room shimmered again, and the books closed gently, sliding back into their places. The silver glow around the wand faded into a soft gold, then disappeared entirely. Harry, Ron, and Hermione exchanged looks, confused, curious, but oddly calm. There was no fear, no urgency, only wonder, and a shared sense that something very old, very patient, was slowly beginning to share its story. They sat, cross-legged, on the thick rug in the middle of the room, letting the silence settle around them. Outside the enchanted windows, snow had begun to fall, each flake moving like a soft punctuation in the stillness. Hermione finally spoke. "I think the wand once belonged to someone who vanished, someone it still remembers." Harry nodded, "And maybe it doesn't want to be chosen again, because it hasn't let go." The idea hung in the air, tender and solemn, a wand grieving, a spell unended, a magic unresolved. Ron, fiddling with a warm teacup the room had thoughtfully provided, mused aloud. What if the wand never chose again, because the witch or wizard it chose never came back? That thought made the silence even gentler, even deeper, and then came the twist. As Hermione gently touched one of the old scrolls on a nearby shelf, a faint name appeared in golden ink, glimmering and slow, as though written by an invisible quill. The name shimmered across the page like a whisper spoken in time, Elowyn Meerith. Hermione whispered it aloud. Elowyn Meerith. I've never read that name before. The room pulsed again. On the cushion, the wand stirred, glowing faintly. Harry turned toward Hermione, eyes narrowing slightly in thought. What if she was the one, the wand's last wielder? They didn't speak after that, not for a long while. They sat in soft silence, surrounded by the magic of remembrance, the glow of mysteries long tucked away, and the hum of a room that remembered when no one else did. The second magical twist was not a battle or a spell gone wrong. It was the gentle revelation that some magic lingers not to be used, but to be remembered. And in that room, on that quiet night, three young friends sat with history in their hands, not rushing to solve it, but listening, slowly, respectfully, and with wonder. As the candlelight dimmed to a gentle glow, and the room of requirement began to fade into its slumber once more, the trio quietly made their way out, the name Elowyn Meerith echoing softly in their minds like a lullaby too old to sing, but too beautiful to forget. The castle had its own way of murmuring through the days. After the encounter in the room of requirement, everything felt a little more aware. The corridors echoed just a bit differently. The portraits seemed to lean closer when passed, their eyes less idle and more attentive. And in the quiet hush of the library, pages turned more carefully, as if even the books were trying to listen. Hermione had begun researching Elowyn Meerith the very next morning. She dug through the restricted section with a special pass from Professor McGonagall, who had raised an eyebrow when Hermione mentioned the name, but said nothing more. Instead, she quietly unlocked the chain and left the trio alone under the supervision of Madame Pince, who dusted nearby but didn't interrupt. For hours, the three combed through the faded texts and parchment scrolls. They found Elowyn's name only once, briefly mentioned in a century-old registry of wand makers and magical artisans. It was written almost casually, wedged between other long-forgotten names. Elowyn Meerith, noted for her research on wand memory and silent spell work, presumed lost in the northern wilds. Wand never returned to Ollivanders. That was it. No birth date, no achievements, no explanation of how she vanished. Just a gentle nod to a life that had once existed, flickered briefly, and then disappeared like a candle blown out by wind. Hermione closed the book softly. It's as if she slipped through time. Harry nodded, thoughtful, and left behind something that remembered her. Ron, who had taken to chewing the end of a quill while they worked, finally spoke. So the wand, it never forgot her? Hermione looked at the old registry again. No, and maybe it never forgave the world for forgetting her either. That evening, they returned to the room of requirement. The wand was still there, waiting, still silent and oddly patient. But this time, something had changed. When Harry entered, the air shifted. A warm draft passed across his face, like the breath of an old friend. The fireplace in the room flickered to life on its own, and a small table appeared in the center, with an unopened envelope resting on top. None of them had seen it before. Harry picked it up gently. The envelope was old, sealed with a faded wax crest they didn't recognize. No name, just a symbol, a wand crossed with a snowdrop flower. Hermione inhaled sharply. That's her symbol. It was scribbled in the corner of the registry. Elowyn used the snowdrop as her signature. Harry opened the envelope slowly. Inside, a letter written in spindly handwriting trembled faintly with residual magic, like a voice reaching across time. To the one who still listens, this wand once knew love. Not of power, but of presence. Not of greatness, but of care. And now it waits, as I once waited. My work was never meant to last. It was meant to echo. If you are reading this, then the echo remains. Let it rest. Gently, let it be heard, not used. E.M. A quiet hush fell across the room. For the next few days, they didn't speak of it much. Something about the letter made them act differently, not out of fear, but out of reverence. They felt less like investigators now, and more like caretakers of a memory too delicate to touch. Still, small mysteries continued to unfold. On the third night, as they passed the mirror of Erised, forgotten in a lesser-used corridor near the charms classroom, Harry paused. The mirror, which had once shown him a family he longed for, now showed something else entirely. A young witch with soft eyes and dark curls, standing beside a wand that shimmered with silver mist. She wasn't smiling, she wasn't sad. He simply looked patient. Hermione joined him. When she looked into the mirror, she saw the same figure, but this time, Elowyn was standing in a forest clearing beneath a full moon, holding a journal with glowing runes across the cover. Ron saw only a chair, with the wand resting atop it, surrounded by wildflowers. She's still somewhere, Hermione whispered. Not alive, maybe, but somewhere. That night, a gentle suspicion took root. Not fearful, but strange and calming all the same. What if Elowyn had never truly vanished? What if some part of her spellwork, her memories, her intent, was folded gently into the wand, into Hogwarts itself, into the very magic they were now feeling softly ripple around them? The next clue came in the form of a dream. Harry awoke before dawn with the memory of walking through the forbidden forest, not in fear, but in stillness. Trees parting around him, silver mist curling at his feet. And then a voice, not spoken aloud, but present within the leaves. Follow what remembers. Do not chase what's forgotten. He told Hermione and Ron the next morning, and neither laughed. In fact, Hermione's face turned thoughtful. Wand memory, she said. Some spells don't use words at all. They're carried by places, rooms, emotions. They decided to visit Hagrid that afternoon, not for answers, but for presence. They hadn't told him much, only that they were working on a quiet mystery. Hagrid, ever gentle, served them treacle fudge and listened to their story with soft eyes, never interrupting. When Harry mentioned the dream, Hagrid nodded slowly. Some wands, well, they don't really forget, especially if their witch or wizard was kind. Love leaves a mark, even on wood. And then, as they were leaving, he handed them a folded scrap of parchment. Found this a while ago near the edge of the forest. Figured it was a lost note, but maybe it's not meant to be lost. It was another fragment of a journal, handwritten, familiar ink. I no longer remember what spell I used to bind the whisper, but I remember the silence that followed. The forest doesn't echo, it listens. If you return, come softly. Another whisper, another presence. The suspense did not come from fear, but from the slow, quiet understanding that the wand, the letters, and Elowyn's lingering memory were gently guiding them through a tale not of danger, but of remembrance. They weren't solving a mystery. They were walking beside one. And the castle, it seemed to know. Hallways shifted subtly to make space for them. Portraits nodded in knowing silence. Even Peeves, for once, didn't bother them during their walks. That night, as they returned to the room of requirement, they found a new object had appeared beside the wand, a worn journal, the cover stitched with a snowdrop. They didn't open it, not yet. Instead, they sat together, the fire crackling gently beside them, the wand resting quietly on its velvet cushion, and the journal between them like a bridge. Suspense in its softest form had woven around them, not with sharp edges or shouts, but with candlelight and careful breath, like the pages of an old story that turns only when you're ready to read on. While the soft hush of the castle's nighttime lull cradled the grounds in gentle silence, the group of students, drawn together by the mystery of the ancient wand, found themselves standing at the edge of a choice. Not one that involved spells or danger, but something quieter. A moment that asked them to follow curiosity or return to comfort. Neville, still holding the box with the unchosen wand, looked around at the others. The warmth from their enchanted lanterns cast dancing shadows along the corridor wall. Ginny tilted her head thoughtfully, as if listening to something invisible. Beside her, Luna blinked slowly, as if in a dream. "It didn't respond to you, Neville," Hermione said gently, arms crossed, "but maybe it was never meant to." Neville opened the lid once more. The wand remained still, a beautifully carved U-piece, worn by time, etched with ancient runes. It had refused to spark, refused to glow, but something about it still tugged at them. "We could leave it here," Ron muttered, glancing back toward the castle's main corridor. "Maybe it wants to stay lost." But Luna knelt down beside the wand box and whispered, "Maybe it just doesn't want to be found by the wrong need." Hermione frowned slightly. "What do you mean?" Luna didn't answer right away. Her eyes moved over the wand as if it were a person, not an object. Some magic only stirs when the heart is quiet enough to listen. Ginny, brushing her hair behind her ear, added, "What if this isn't about choosing a wand? What if it's about something the wand still remembers?" That suggestion stirred the air around them. The torches seemed to flicker lower for a moment, and a soft breeze moved through the hallway, though there were no windows open. Neville took a breath, deeper than usual. "Should we try again?" But Hermione shook her head. "No, not like before." The group decided to split gently, not out of disagreement, but out of trust in each other's instincts. Ginny and Neville would head to the library to find references to ancient wand lore. Hermione and Ron would retrace the path they'd found the wand on, hoping the corridor itself held more clues. Luna, however, chose a different route entirely. "I'll go to the greenhouse," she said, standing slowly. "The wand was covered in soil when we found it. Maybe it grew through something." Neville gave a small smile. "That's a Luna answer." "I know," she replied. The castle never stopped whispering, even when the students scattered gently across its halls. The moon outside gleamed high over the towers, casting soft glimmers on the cold stone floors. Somewhere deeper in the building, the great-grandfather clock struck a slow, echoing tone, one that didn't match the hour. In the library, Neville and Ginny sat in hushed candlelight, parchment and ancient books spread before them. Ginny traced her finger over an entry titled "Wands That Never Returned." "Look," she said, "it's not just about choice. Some wands refuse because they were never meant to be passed again." Neville frowned. "Like grief?" She nodded, like a farewell never spoken. Meanwhile, Ron and Hermione found themselves in the corridor where they had first stumbled across the strange hum in the air. They looked for signs, a hidden door, a stone that wasn't like the rest. Nothing obvious revealed itself, but there was one moment when Hermione stopped, walking, and pressed her hand against the wall. "This place feels..." "Paused," she said quietly. Ron didn't speak. He stood beside her, eyes soft. At the greenhouse, Luna walked gently between rows of sleeping magical plants. The air was warmer there and filled with the scent of damp leaves and root essence. She didn't search like someone trying to solve a puzzle. She just wandered, not looking, but allowing the place to reveal. Then she saw it, a small section of soil where a single vine curled softly in a spiral, untouched by the surrounding overgrowth. She knelt and touched the dirt. It hummed under her fingers. Later that evening, they regrouped in the old Defense Against the Dark Arts classroom, once disused, now glowing gently with candlelight. Each had something to share, though none had all the answers. "The wand wasn't just lost," Hermione said, laying down a sketch of the corridor markings. "It was sealed." "In memory," Ginny added, tapping the book with the lore entry. "By its owner, someone who didn't want it to be held again." Neville looked down at the wand, still resting quietly. For the first time, he didn't try to pick it up. "I think," he said slowly, "it wants us to understand, not to use it." The others agreed, and so the choice was made, not to force, not to test, but to respect. They gently placed the wand back in the box, wrapped it in a soft velvet cloth, and set it on a windowsill where the moonlight kissed its edges. No wards, no spells, just quiet acknowledgement. A goodbye, or perhaps a thank you. "I hope," Luna whispered, "that wherever its owner is, they know we listened." Outside the window, the wind stirred the leaves. The wand did not glow, it did not stir, but in the stillness, it felt at peace, and so did they. The night had grown older, deeper, quieter. Within the still walls of the empty classroom, the gentle candlelight continued to flicker, casting soft golden glows along the weathered desks and shelves. Outside, the moon remained high, silvering the grounds of Hogwarts with a sleepy shimmer, and inside, the air held a kind of reverence, like something old was waiting to be remembered. Neville sat with the box before him once more, though he hadn't opened it. No one had tried to lift the wand again. It wasn't about that anymore. Luna walked softly to the windowsill and stood where the moonlight bathed the velvet-wrapped wand in pale glow. She didn't speak, but her presence brought a certain clarity to the space. She simply stood, gazing out, her fingertips gently pressed to the edge of the sill. Hermione returned with another book, one from the restricted section, borrowed under permission. It was an aged, cracking volume titled Wands of Memory and Mourning. "Oh." She opened to a marked page. "There's a passage here," she whispered, "about wands that were bonded through grief, ones that responded to powerful, unspoken emotion, not to power or skill." She traced the lines with care. It says, "In rare cases, a wand may refuse all hands if the bond it carried was forged through sacrifice. Such wands become vessels of memory, not magic, and will rest in silence unless what was left unsaid is finally spoken." A hush followed her voice. Even the small ticking clock in the corner seemed to soften. Ginny leaned forward. "You think the wand is holding on to something? A feeling?" Hermione nodded. "Not its own, the owner's. It's not broken, it's mourning." The realization landed gently, but deeply. The wand had never chosen again, not out of spite or stubbornness, but because it was still holding something for someone. Ron frowned slightly. "But who?" Neville lifted his head slowly, something beginning to surface in his mind. "The vine Luna found. It had no root system, just curled in a spiral, and the dirt around it hummed." He stood and walked toward the box. "I've seen that shape before, in the herbology archives. It's a magical symbol, the spiral of parting." Hermione's eyes widened. "That's a burial sigil from the early founders' traditions. It was used when someone didn't have time for final words." They all turned to the wand, quiet settling in like snowfall. "It's not about who held it," Luna whispered. "It's about what they couldn't say." Neville carefully removed the velvet cloth again. The wand was still, untouched by time or desire, but now it seemed to shimmer faintly, not with magic, but with memory, as though something very old and very soft, had stirred. And then Ginny, almost by instinct, reached into her pocket and pulled out a folded parchment. "I didn't know when to share this," she said. "I found it tucked behind a shelf in the room of requirement weeks ago. I thought it was just someone's poetry." She opened it slowly. It was a letter, unfinished. The ink faded in places, the words written with a trembling hand. "To my dearest companion, this wand has saved more than just my life. It's held my fears, my hope, and the moments I never had time to speak aloud. If you find it, know this: I never meant to leave so suddenly. I had more to say. I carried your name like a light. Forgive me, always." Oh, the signature was missing, but somehow it didn't need one. They all stood in silence, a wand that had never chosen again, because it was never meant to. It had spoken its last magic in the hands of someone whose parting was incomplete, and now, perhaps, it had waited all these years for a group gentle enough to listen, not with spells, but with stillness. Neville placed the letter gently beside the wand, and for the first time, the wand shimmered. Just once, not in a burst, not in defiance, but in peace. A soft glow passed over its wood, like a breath, long held, finally being released. A message whispered into the quiet. A thank you, or maybe goodbye. The room warmed just slightly, not from fire or spell work, but from something older, something truer. Luna placed her hand on Neville's shoulder and said softly, "You didn't have to be chosen, Neville. You just had to remember what others forgot." He didn't reply. He didn't need to. The wand had spoken in the only way it still could. Through the silence, through the memory, through the stillness of those who were willing to listen. And in that small classroom, where time felt slower and the walls seemed to sigh with gentle understanding, the mystery faded, not lost, but fulfilled. Some magic wasn't meant to be wielded. Some was only meant to be remembered. The classroom remained still long after the last shimmer faded from the wand. Outside, the sky had softened into pre-dawn hues, a quiet wash of deep blue and faint rose peeking over the hills beyond the forbidden forest. The moon had begun its descent, and the stars, once sharp and bright, now blurred gently as if growing sleepy themselves. Inside, the candles had melted low, their flames flickering with a final whisper of warmth. The wand now rested quietly atop its velvet cloth, as though it, too, had finally found rest. There was no more hum of old magic, no flicker of waiting, only a hush, the hush of peace. Neville remained seated by the desk, his gaze gentle and reflective. He wasn't thinking in words anymore, just feelings. A soft blend of wonder, respect, and something like quiet gratitude. Not everything in the magical world had to be solved. Some things only needed to be understood. Luna had curled herself near the window, her knees drawn to her chest as she watched the colors of morning stretch gently across the sky. Her breath fogged the glass ever so slightly, and she traced a slow spiral with her fingertip, a mirror of the vine, of the sigil, of the journey they had followed. It felt right, somehow, as if all things had come gently full circle. Hermione had begun reshelving the books, taking care to return each one in the softest way possible. She whispered apologies to the pages for waking them, a small habit she claimed made the tomes feel respected, and tonight it felt especially important. These books had held stories that weren't meant to be shouted or cast in spells, but remembered with care, like the whisper of a friend long gone. Ron and Ginny had pulled 2 chairs close together and sat quietly, heads resting against the old wood, eyes soft and distant. No one spoke much, no one needed to. The room had become a place of rest, not just for the wand, but for them all. Eventually, Hermione closed the final book with a gentle thump and looked toward Neville. "So, what now?" she asked, voice low and even. Neville looked at the wand, then at the letter beside it. "We leave it," he said simply. "Let it stay in stillness. Let it keep the memory safe. That's what it's been doing all along." The others nodded. Together, they wrapped the wand once more in its velvet cloth, not to hide it, but to comfort it, to preserve the softness of the moment. They placed the box gently back into the cabinet where they had found it, this time adding a tiny enchanted lock, not to keep anyone out, but to make sure that only those with calm intentions could open it again. It wasn't about hiding the wand, it was about honoring it. Before they left, Neville paused at the door. He glanced around the room one last time. The gentle curve of the window, the worn stone floor, the desk that had held the box like it was cradling something precious. "Thank you," he said softly, almost inaudibly, and as they stepped into the corridor, the door behind them didn't creak or groan as it closed. It simply eased shut, like a sigh of contentment, and the lanterns in the hallway flickered in greeting. The castle itself felt warmer, as if the walls had listened to every word. Their footsteps echoed gently along the long corridor. The portraits on the walls dozed in their frames, some faintly smiling as the students passed. Outside, morning birds had begun to stir, calling sleepily from the towers and trees. As they reached the main stairway, Luna turned and said quietly, "Some magic isn't meant to move the world, just to remind us of its gentleness." No one answered aloud, but the smile that passed between them all was enough. By the time they reached the Gryffindor common room, the fire had dimmed into warm embers, casting the room in a gentle orange glow. Blankets were scattered from where others had dozed off. The scent of old wood, parchment, and dreams filled the air. They each settled into chairs, couches, or cushions near the fire, and for the first time that night, they let themselves truly relax. The mystery hadn't ended in a duel or a discovery to be published. It had ended in something far more rare, quiet understanding. Somewhere, far beneath the castle, or perhaps beyond time itself, a memory finally slept. And so did they. Up in the dormitory, the castle had settled once more into its timeless rhythm, that gentle breathing of stone and silence that made Hogwarts feel like a living, dreaming being. The moon, now low and silver, cast soft light across the wooden beams of the sleeping quarters. Curtains swayed slightly with a draft that smelled faintly of grass and morning dew, as though the grounds themselves were whispering lullabies to the students within. Neville had tucked himself into bed, the last flicker of candlelight dancing across the tip of his wand before it went out. His thoughts wandered, not with urgency, but with the calm unraveling of a soft thread. The wand, the vines, the old enchantment. It all blended into one peaceful feeling. A reminder that magic, at its heart, was not always about grand spells or victories. Sometimes it simply asked to be remembered, to be felt. In another room, Luna lay still, eyes half closed, her hands folded over a sketch of the vine symbol she had drawn before bed. The paper rose and fell with her slow breaths. Her face wore the kind of smile you might carry into a dream, the kind that needs no words, only wonder. All around the castle, other rooms rested in similar peace. Portraits slept soundly. The ghosts had faded to silence. Even the owls in the towers had tucked heads beneath wings. And far below, in that quiet classroom where the wand now rested once more, everything remained untouched. The air was calm, the light was soft, and if you stood still enough, you might almost feel it, the hum of contentment that lingers when something old has finally been understood. Tonight, the wand did not wait. It simply rested, and perhaps tomorrow, or many years from now, someone else would find it again, someone gentle, someone listening. But for now, in this moment, all was still. As the stars glimmered quietly over the turrets and towers of Hogwarts, the castle sighed in its sleep, not from weariness, but from peace. You're safe now, dear listener. You've journeyed through a story wrapped in wonder, but it's time to let go and drift into your own dreams. The magic will still be here when you wake. Sleep well.